Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We're just going to give another couple seconds to get people kind of situated and in the room. But we're very happy that you're here and excited to have kind of this conversation today on the matrix map. A little reflection after 15 years since nonprofit sustainability came out. So just give us a second and we'll go ahead and get started. Right. I will go ahead and get started. I know we have some more people that are set to join us and to do that, but what we want to do is be also respectful of your time. Thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. I'm Steve Zimmerman. I'm the principal here at Spectrum Nonprofit Services. It's a pleasure to have all of you with us here today for a conversation on the matrix map, applying 15 years of insights to today's nonprofit realities. And also, joining me today is Jan Masaoka, who I'll introduce in a second. But you are really in for, I think, a great conversation today about this. Just a couple quick things on some housekeeping as we get started. We will be recording this webinar and sharing it back out so that you will have access to the recording as well as the question that always comes up, the slide deck. Yes, you will have access to the slides, so you will be able to get access to that. We do have kind of a couple different ways that we can interact. Kind of really, I have our chat box open. We want your questions, etc. So to be able to interact with us that way. You can also use the raise the hand function and we can take you off of mute. We would love to have your voice as part of this discussion and reflection as well, because you're the ones who actually, in many cases, have actually used the matrix map. So you often have much more insight than we do about it. So, please do use that function and come off of mute. Before we go too much further, I just want to kind of get a sense here of who is in the room. I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll that, they always seem to move. Just to get a sense kind of as you think about kind of your organization or, and I know that some of you are and others, but kind of who's in the room, three questions there, your role, your budget size and your mission area. You can also please feel free to introduce yourself into the chat if you would like, but kind of going through that. Another couple seconds. All right. It's so nice to see so many familiar names on this. So thank you. I see Anita and Mary and Maggie, and it's just really very meaningful to have so many of you here. So here's just a sample, kind of looking to see kind of who is in the room. A smattering from across multi-service social service organizations seem to be the largest, of course, followed by other, and then some arts and culture, children, youth, and families kind of down the line. From a budget size perspective, about a third of you almost over 5 million and a third of you between 1 and 2.5 million, and then a smattering kind of around the others, areas, and then just a mix overall. A third of you are, a little over a third of you are CEOs or executive directors, a third of you others, and then some development program and board members. And of course, here I am, a finance guy. No finance people on the call. So, there we go. Busy closing the books or some other excuse that they'll come up with. But it's great to have you all. I'm, grateful for it. So we're joined today for this reflection by Jan Masaoka, who's really the co-author and is a longtime mentor, friend, former boss of mine, really kind of the creator of the Matrix Map. Many of you know Jan from her vast writings that she's done on board governance. She was the founder of Blue Avocado. She is now currently working with the Philanthropy Project, working to talk about donor advised funds, and we'll talk a little bit about that perhaps. And of course, she was the longtime CEO of the California Association of Nonprofits, Cal Nonprofits, as well as Compass Point Nonprofit Services before that. And Jan, just really grateful to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
So before we kind of dive in, I want to just talk a little bit about the matrix map and provide kind of the 50,000-foot overview. From our experience and kind of working in nonprofits, and I can tell you this from being a finance person, is that oftentimes when we talk about finance in particular, it is segregated from the discussion of mission impact, right? They're two different discussions. And I'll often say that it's not our fault. I mean, our organizations are kind of designed and structured this way. You have a director of finance, you have a director of programs or a development director, so there's segregation there. I mean, even look at our board meetings, right? You have look at your board agenda. First you approve the minutes because you don't do that, the world may end. But then, you have a financial report, and then you have a, fundraising report and a programmatic report. And nowhere in the financial report do you talk about the impact that you're having for those numbers, and vice versa. We rarely talk about kind of revenue streams associated with particular programs. But we do in our sector often talk about the dual bottom line and the recognition that it's not enough for our organizations to be financially strong if they're not having impact. And likewise, if all you're talking about is impact with no way of paying for it, and let's be honest, we've all been part of those strategic plans, they remain a dream instead of becoming a reality. So the matrix map is really, in essence, about recognizing the dual bottom line of both mission impact and financial viability, and that every single decision an organization makes affects both of these. So we know that when we think about big decisions like, should we start a new program or not? Or should we buy a building? When you make those sort of decisions, you're looking at both sides. But even the small day-to-day decisions involve both of these. And so, in this kind of conversation, what we're really trying to do is to make that decision making explicit and to allow board members and leadership and everybody involved in a nonprofit to understand both the financial and the impact components of strategic decisions that they're making. So we created this tool, and kind of using this tool, which, let's be honest, didn't come out of thin air, came from the Boston Consulting Group model, cash cow, but adapted that to the nonprofits of a 2x2 grid that takes everything an organization does and places it on here based on its profitability and its mission impact. And I think it does a couple different things. One is it allows us to see how the different elements of an organization work together to drive that dual bottom line. And as a finance guy, one of the things I like about it is it makes financial decisions more accessible. right? You can look at this from a financial side, and a well-structured financial statement can actually, tell you the same information. But here's what we all know: not everybody actually can read that financial statement. So this is a way of kind of showcasing the same data in that accessible way, which then allows people to meaningfully engage in strategic discussions. The map also shows where we're investing resources. The circle size on the map represents gross expenses. So you can see which programs are the largest, where are you investing resources. And it also makes explicit kind of discussions about the relative impact of programs. I remember when I was a CFO, we were trying to pass a budget, and we finally did, thank goodness. And and I was so happy it was a bottom line, that came out where we needed it to be. And I had somebody say to me afterwards, "I can't believe we gave X amount of dollars to that program. That program doesn't do anything." And I realized kind of at that point that in the process of trying to have a financial discussion, we actually were making impact discussions as well. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't have any idea what to do with that knowledge until I had an opportunity to work with Jan at Compass Point. But it is really about kind of making those sort of assumptions that we have explicit. And the map does more than just present a picture of an organization's business model. It also provides guidance then about how to proceed based on the quadrant. It allows us to understand kind of, should we invest and grow those things that are stars and really try to maintain them? Keep but contain costs for those hearts in our organization, and balance that together with our money trees down there on the right. And ultimately also to consider the opportunity costs and consider where should we be investing resources to deliver exceptional impact in a financially viable manner, which sometimes means we have to close programs. So really kind of providing some guidance for boards to go ahead and make decisions. All of this came together. And after we tried it out, we actually changed the name. Originally, it was our program portfolio analysis, and kind of really thinking about how does this all play out. In kind of came together in two books. The first being Nonprofit Sustainability, that came out now 15 years ago, followed up by kind of more of a workbook because they don't like to do second editions anymore. It's a workbook called The Sustainability Mindset. There. And I will say that, one of the great pieces about nonprofit sustainability is that while there were three co-authors, the final kind of write through of it was done by Jan, and is in her voice. And I find myself sometimes going back to read it just to again remind myself what is it we're trying to do here, in a clear way. So Jan, I guess I'm gonna throw it over here to you as that's kind of an overview of the matrix map. From your perspective, kind of what were the goals? Where did the idea come from your, from your experience?
Well, I'm glad. Thanks, first of all. Thanks, Stephen Moises, for having me and organizing this today. I think it definitely the Boston Consulting Group, their matrix was a big influence, but there was also at the time a lot of things called balanced scorecards.
Mm,
There were kind of an effort to do this and similar things. And I remember especially being inspired by a copy of Us magazine in the Compass Point lunchroom that had this matrix related to what kind of girlfriend are you? And I just realized that, we use these kind of 2x2s for a lot of different things. And I think it's been surprising the staying power that this particular one has really been able to achieve.
hmm
And I asked that just that slide you show. I mean, that was actually a real client of mine, which was a Latino theater, and they're still going strong. And I remember doing that map with them, as a matter of fact. So, and of course,
Wow.
Steve and I, everybody else, it's great to see old friends, but Steve and I at least haven't gotten any older in 15 years.
And of course, if I took off my glasses, I wouldn't be able to see you right now. So, um,
Oh, oh, sorry. One more thing. I
yeah.
like the fact that you said, and Michael noticed this in the chat too, that, programs are not discussed with impact. And I would say impact is hardly discussed at all.
Hmm.
I would go further than that. You might like do sort of a formal evaluation, but in particularly, we don't discuss relative impact. Like all programs are good, like all children
Yeah.
are brilliant. And I think and we especially, I know this from being an executive director twice, you never go to the board and say, today I want to feature our worst program. They probably haven't even heard of it.
Hmm. Well, and I guess I always say I think most boards will approach questions like, should we do X or not? And the answer is always yes, because we're nonprofit people. Why wouldn't you? But really, the question needs to be, should we do X or Y or Z or A, B, C, or D of everything else that is there? And so I think the map tries to help make those things explicit as people use it. So 15 years from when the book first came out, I guess I've learned a lot into how we use it and what that looks like since then. I'm curious kind of what 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 do you think we've learned from 15 years of implementation of this?
Why don't you start? I feel like you have much more direct experience than I do.
Well, I mean, look, I said the kind of phrase before that people can meaningfully engage in strategic discussions. And what I really saw during COVID, and I think you see this with organizations overall, is that when there is a existential crisis, as for many organizations there is at this moment, that finance tends to play an outsized role. And if you don't understand the finances, it's very hard to actually I think, to get your voice heard in the discussions. And so for me, I think the biggest thing that I've seen is that as people have used the tool and kind of used it to understand their business model, it opens up the door for creativity and it opens up the door for people to understand what the organization is facing, and therefore my word is meaningfully contribute, because we all know people will contribute even if they don't understand the backstory, um, but to meaningfully contribute in a way that generates new ideas and tries to say, how do we make this organization work? I think that empowerment is one of the bigger pieces of it. um, I also tend to think that people don't tend to spend enough time, and they tend to spend too much time kind of thinking about their poorly performing programs instead of really saying where are their bright spots, and kind of where are the strengths that we can actually really go in.
Well, I think I don't want to skip over the importance of having a picture.
Mhm.
And I'm just looking at your where you're located, and I see a picture of a boat in the background. And
Mhm.
suppose that you had instead a description of a boat in words. Or suppose you were reading carefully a recipe for, say, strawberry shortcake, but not being able to see a photo of it. I just think that, and I do another sort of origin story kind of thing is, we tried out several versions of this with Compass Point Board. And I think that I remember really clearly a board member saying, "This is the first time I actually understand what we do." And I've had that experience with so many different organizations.
Mhm. I mean, and I think the other part of that is that, now that it's been around long enough, I mean, I have clients that have in the last, 12 years updated their map 3 or 4 times. And again, being able to kind of show how their organization has evolved. And I had people that even during COVID, or would without updating their map, would pull out the picture and draw right on it, to be able to, so this is what's happening right now, and in a way, again, to try to engage and get more voices there.
Mhm. Well, I think you're right that Actually, right now, I think everybody is in a state of tremendous uncertainty. You know, that even though we are all seeing people do layoffs and we're seeing some organizations close, I think the predominant feeling is still uncertainty rather than specific cutbacks. And the unemployment statistics in the nonprofit community are still not moving very much. So I do think it's still kind of like, where is there a cliff ahead of us and how far ahead of it is? And I think so. I do think that there's kind of this frustration, which doesn't happen so much in a growing economy, but which is where some program is losing money. Like I remember working with an organization, their childcare center was just losing money like crazy. And you always have people on the staff and people on the board in those times who say, well, we have to close it. Right. And then you also have people saying things like, but if we close it, it means we're like against children, you know, and those kinds of conversations are so frustrating. And, you know, Steve, you and I are finance people. So, you know, you tend probably know what tends we sort of default to. And I think that the key thing is this offers a way out of that. There's a third choice to make besides close it or let it drive us into bankruptcy.
hmm Well, and I do think that, the that strategic imperative in the heart quadrant is, keep but contain costs. And I think that, one of the pieces that, we write in the book is that you don't want to close that program, but you can't also let them be sacred cows. And as you said, that's the conversation that we're trying to have. Most of these decisions tend to be about dosage or nuance or how much,
Yes.
how much is enough. And to try and you're not looking for the right answer, you're looking for the balance.
You know, we have a question from Kristen or a comment.
Yeah. Let me take you off of mute. Here you go.
Christina, sorry.
Christina. Christina, are you there? You can unmute if you want to come on here.
So right now, I mean, I think that while we're waiting for that to
Yeah.
happen, I do think that people are saying right now, what are we going to have to close?
hmm
Are we going to have to close? You know, and I think that it's hard to just without just looking at, say, your programs or looking at your financial statements to really think, well, what would that mean to us? And, you know, I'm talking right now with this large housing organization here in San Francisco, and they're losing about $6 million a year for this year and the last couple of years. And so they have to make some what we would call hard decisions. And I think, you know, the word hard, that we've all heard that phrase, like hard decisions, like, you know, she won't make the hard decisions or something like that. And hard decisions are not hard like calculus is hard. They're hard because they're unpopular. So in this
hmm
organization, the hard decisions are to close some of the affordable housing facilities, which means hundreds of people who are currently in affordable housing may lose their housing. So that would be a great example of a unpopular, deeply unpopular position. Um, but one of the things that is hard for them to figure out is what would be the impact on the rest of the organization. And I think the matrix map helps you actually see, okay, this is what that would mean. And how do we adjust for that?
Yeah, and I think also kind of giving you look, the way we do the finances is and we had a lot of back and forth on this point is, fully allocated true costs. You don't see any bubble on the map for administration. And so we kind of we take kind of that and again split it out across all the programs, which of course the criticism is then if you close a program, you don't actually realize that entire amount of money. But it does begin to get you into the mindset of this is what the true cost of impact is and the amount that we need to raise. And I think, again, anything you can do to try and that you can try and you know increase financial understanding within an organization are is really important. Um, Let me kind of, I want to throw a little bit of it throw a little bit of this open and really think about for people today, ask kind of people in chat to put in kind of what's the biggest strategic challenge your organization is facing today, and just be curious kind of from your experience, and as you think about the matrix map, kind of perhaps we can talk about how people are using it today to be able to move as they go forward.
I like the comment from our former coworker Anita saying she remembers the Us magazine in the lunchroom. So that's fun to see. And I just for those of you who have used matrix map methodology, you know about the stop sign or the question mark, right? The one that you might want to give away. And I think that I remember that I wanted to call that the fruit cake. Because it kind of like the iconic American fruit cake that sits on your counter because some relative mailed it to you and you don't want to eat it, but you don't want to throw it away and you don't know what to do. But I got outvoted by Steve and Jean on that for a stop sign. But I still, when I give presentations on this, I still call it the fruit cake.
I actually remember you wanting to call the book Fusion as well, which
That's
I was afraid was going to be perceived in the cooking aisle over in the bookshelf. But yes.
Jordan, I really appreciate your comment in the chat about protecting core programs, but not acknowledging that some are in danger. And I do think that I like the fact that the matrix map says things like, you can have hearts, but maybe you can't have five, you can have two, or maybe you can have a smaller heart. So I know a Catholic Charities here in the Bay Area, for example, that has had to cut back the number of free family counseling sessions that they're able to give. They don't want to give it up, but they just can't afford to do as many as they have been doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really does. It lets you understand kind of the effect of trying to say, trying to save everything. Look, I think especially that impact side. I worked at an organization where, we had a budget deficit, and so we cut every program by 10%. And to me, that's not strategy. That's a cop out because there was no way that every program actually was delivering the same impact. And we lowered our impact and therefore lessened the case for funding us by doing that. And those, again, not easy discussions, but the people that are running those programs also know, that what I think where their impact is relative to others.
I feel like everybody thinks about other people's impact. It's particularly when it comes to scale.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that's an important part of the matrix map too, is, it's that scale counts, but it's not everything. But, if you're in a program that serves, 100 families a year, you probably look down on the program that serves 5,000. Oh, I mean, they just scratch the surface. We really go in depth.
Mhm.
And the other program people are saying, those people, they hardly serve anybody. So I think I'm not sure that we're all aware that we're the ones that actually are having lower impact.
Well, I agree, and I think there's also a school of thought if we just had more money, think of more of the impact we could have.
That's true.
Um, so Maggie put into the chat kind of trying to build a business model that can be flexible and of course getting people to understand it overall. I do think one of the other kind of game changers on here was that we weren't, I say finance, but that's also somewhat code for fundraising by
Yeah.
putting kind of unrestricted development activities on the map. It also made explicit that that different activities have different returns and have different purposes, but also talked a lot about, to me, I've seen people use it a lot to talk about investing in fund development. And I think especially right now, as we're looking at people shifting their business models and coming up with new revenue streams, the question I kind of always ask about that is, how are you going to invest in that revenue stream to actually realize its potential? And I think it's again not an easy answer to that, but it is also a false hope to think that you're just going to say we're going to go after individuals now without actually investing in that revenue stream.
Well, I think it's always easy to say, like, either, well, the executive director should just go raise some more money, or here's another good solution. Let's hire a development director and they can start getting major gifts right away. I think, though, the point that underlies your statement is that it takes judgment. There's a
Mm,
judgment call. And I think we're saying, this is the matrix map is not an algorithm. It's not like it requires judgment. It requires judgment about impact, and it requires judgment about the future.
hmm
And I think, knowing whether something has the potential to grow or whether it, is probably not going to continue to receive funding, or whether there's a competitor organization coming up a lot faster. I think those are the things that call for real judgment. I would say here in California, probably one of the biggest scary things is private equity is moving into so many areas that we really used to think
mm.
of as nonprofit domain. They're buying up Montessori schools now in California, for example, mental health residential facilities, a lot of things. And so I think we in the nonprofit community are thinking, this is a new threat. All right. And so, how do we think about that in terms of maybe a program that's been state funded for a long time, for example, and gets, we believe in it and the state believes in it. This is a new kind of threat that we're facing and related to that program.
hmm Yeah. And I do think, part of the thing with the STAR programs of the Invest and Grow is to kind of keep that for-profit, almost for-profit attitude of we have to protect, you have to protect those sort of programs. Um, it's hard to fight against PE coming in, but yeah, I mean, absolutely. Monica in chat talked about, really trying to encourage grantees to examine impact in this manner. And your comment, Monica, kind of made me think about who's the right people to do the matrix map. Because I'll tell you, in my experience, we had a task force. I worked with one client. We had a task force of people to assessing mission impact, and it is just an assessment. It's getting people's ideas out, and we had a funder on that task force, and it was a disaster because nobody wanted to have a funder in the room and say, oh, that program doesn't really have impact. So you do need to have kind of candid conversation. I'll also say originally, I think when we came out of it, and I think in the book, we say have the full board assess mission impact. And what I've learned from that over the years is that board members typically are only they don't know the programs well enough to really assess the mission impact in a lot of cases. And they tended to equate those programs that were discussed more in board meetings with higher impact. And yet the reason they were being discussed was because they were in trouble.
Okay. That's a great point. Um, I worked with one organization, an Asian American organization, that had a great many volunteers, and they had 15 fundraising events a year. Okay. And so we did a matrix map only on the fundraising events.
Mm,
And so, speaking to your point about investing in, right, what do you throw out? And so I think then it was really easy for us to see. And we didn't quantify it. We just used, high, medium, and low impact, and just makes a lot of money, breaks even, and loses money, right? So we kind of qualitative answers. And it was really clear, some of these fundraising events they just have to go. And even though they have a constituency, or we can convince some other organization that they should take it over, like merge it, and which ones we need to invest in. So I think sometimes it's helpful to do just that. And I think that we also know that uh, often the first best adjustment to a business model is not to start something completely new. The first adjustments are usually to invest in your strong areas, and to just get rid of some of the stop signs. Investing in a new area is a much tougher one.
hmm Yeah. And I mean it's interesting because I think that you know when you have people kind of doing the map and kind of, going through that process, one of the questions that always comes up is how long does it take to actually do it? And my answer is snarkily, how long do you have? I had a client that was in a great shape, so they used the map over a year-long process to educate all the board members about each program, then have them do the assessment, then actually get the business model at the end. Let me tell you, by the end of it, I was exhausted with the thing. So I can only imagine how they felt. But I've also had clients that have done it, as you just said, in an afternoon. The where do you think we are? What does this look like? And throw it up on the board.
Well, I want to say another thing about what it means to invest in fundraising. And a lot of times that can mean, um, so let me give an example. So right now, foundations are telling everybody you should work on individual giving, which of course is
Mhm.
only appropriate for a minority of the kinds of organizations we have on this call today. But I think a lot of times what people think, well, we need to have wealthy people on our board, or we need to have people that know wealthy people or something like that. And that contradicts with our wanting to have people from the affordable house who live in our residences, for example, right, or who benefit from our drug treatment programs or something. And I think that one of the important ways to invest in a program that has government money is to recruit board members with connections to government. And to think of government money as it's a lot of times when you talk to people, how do you raise money? They don't even think that 90% of their money actually may be from government. So, for example, bringing people on the board who have connections to government, they may work in a different branch of government, but they understand how government works. Or they're the kind of community leader that can bring 50 pissed off parents to a city council meeting, which is going to have a lot more impact than a 50-page analytic paper saying how good your evaluations have been. And I think so. Raising money from government takes board leadership the same way individual giving does. And it's a place where we can also bring the strengths of people that don't have the same kind of income to be major donors.
Mhm. Mhm. Appreciate that. Sydney writes into the chat talking about, oh no, it just moved. There it is. About seeing more discussions around earned revenue business models that are not necessarily connected to programs, and seeing that in there. And I think that, look, I like to put those opportunities right on the map as well as their own bubble for two reasons. I think one is it, again, anything in an organization does takes resources, not just financial, but attention of the senior leadership, attention of the board. And so, partly by kind of splitting time and doing that around, you get to see what is the real true cost, and are you making money? I've seen many earned revenue enterprises, earned revenue programs, as well as special events, that when you allocate out staff time associated with that, the revenue doesn't begin to cover it. And so there is kind of that question of how do you either scale something to make it profitable, or what is the role of that program? I think it makes those things explicit as opposed to just, saying this is what we need to do.
I like that point because, we often think that money is the most precious thing that we have in a nonprofit, but actually the most precious and the most scarce is the attention and time of senior leadership. And
Mhm.
so that's where kind of that idea that you mentioned of making strategic decisions every day comes out, because, you're thinking, well, I could go to this Rotary Club meeting this morning, or I could recruit this new board member, and we're not necessarily aware that that's a strategic decision in terms of which programs and which squares in the matrix you're actually investing that precious resource in.
So Jan, we just have a couple minutes left. I'm curious also, let's talk for a second about what is not on the matrix map.
Well, I will say that we used to have colors. We went through a phase of doing colors with the matrix map, and then we abandoned them for black and white images. But well, I think that this is very much organized around programs. And I think there are some things I would have to say, particularly for organizations of color, but not only, where, for example, being a power broker for your community. Here in San Francisco, for example, Chinatown housing, They're an important housing provider, but they're also a power broker for the Chinese community. The mayor wants to talk to them, right? And in most communities, the large nonprofits that are located in communities of color, they have become the locus points of power for those communities. They could be, we hire people who often then go on to be leaders in many different fields, particularly in government. So we're a training ground for those kinds of people. We're a symbol. We're a symbol. So, for example, well, I'm a member of California Friends of the Native Plants, for example, and I think that, what we actually accomplish in our programs, there's something else which is just being visible as somebody will hear. The idea of native plants and important is a symbol to people trying to protect native plants and native habitats. That's important. So I think that these ideas of the intangible things that we accomplish that you can never report on there's no unduplicated individuals or anything. I know our co-author Jean used to live by this thing called San Bruno Mountain, was really more like San Bruno Hill. But in any case, there's a Friends of San Bruno Mountain, of course. But one of the things it does that they recognize is that just driving by it is a good thing, right?
Mm.
Looking at their programs, but just the fact that you're driving by an undeveloped hill is an important thing that they accomplish, but it's not one of their quote unquote programs. So I think that gives us a chance to think about what are our intangible benefits that we create, a community around us, a symbol, employment, a power broker for our constituencies. And those are the things when we have to cut 90% of our budget, then we can stop thinking about surviving and start thinking about prevailing. And I think prevail is my preferred word for what we can do in an existential crisis, because we can hold on to those things a lot of times at much smaller scale or with different programs altogether. So I would urge everybody to use, search and replace on your computer, and every place you put thrive or survive, change it to prevail.
Love that. Thank you. Jan, is there a way that you kind of, Deirdre put into chat kind of how do I bring this to my board? How do I get the board to kind of engage in this sort of exercise?
Well, you mean other than saying, this guy Steve Zimmerman is just so
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be kind of one suggestion I would have. Well, I think the advantage of going to any workshop or webinar is to always say, you know what, I just went to this workshop and I learned something really cool I want to tell you about. And even if you didn't go to a workshop that told you something cool, you can pretend that you did. So I think that it's a great kind of, little kind of lever to get that into the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, let me, take a moment, Jan, just to say thank you to you for joining us today. I'm gonna pause for a second here, David. I see you have your hand up, so let me ask you to unmute and get your voice here.
In relation to that whole last question,
Yeah.
we've actually done the matrix map with Steve a couple of times, an update of our strategic plan, and the one thing that I think was the most powerful part of the whole thing was our entire management team was part of the project, and having all of us get onto the same page and seeing this works, this doesn't work. What do we need to do to move forward? What thoughts do we have? I think that was the most powerful part of it all. And I think that alone, in fact, the last time we did it, one of the days we had our board president come and join us for part of the day. And I think that was a helpful tool to get the board on board with everything that we were looking at and everything we were suggesting we look at for opportunities and to make the organization move forward rather than stagnate. And just it helped our adaptability in the board's visibility of what we're doing and how the map can change what the future will bring. Just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. And it actually is a fantastic point. In the point really being that at the end of the day, the matrix map is an Excel file. It's a picture of your organization. Really, the key power is in leadership, and in that case, with the YWCA of Northwest Illinois, bringing the leadership team together, or for you, all of you who are on today's webinar who have done the matrix map or utilized the matrix map to strengthen your organization, you know that ultimately it is about making those decisions. And let me tell you, even though the map drives decision making, there's a million reasons why you don't make them, why people can find not to make them as well. And especially, I think, in this environment where we're at, the power to prevail for nonprofits lies in people and all of you engaged in our work. So I appreciate so much, Jan, your being with us today and kind of your reflections, and also everybody on today's webinar for your work in helping us build stronger communities and that we all want to live in, that are welcoming and inclusive of everyone. So with that, I will say thank you to everybody for your engagement today, for your kind of participation. We, of course, always do invite your feedback and your questions. And really thank you, Jan, again, for your partnership over the years and for your reflections today.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Moses. Thanks, everybody.